St. Thomas speaks about the principles of reason. I'm going to have a lot to say about them tonight. But this text is very lovely. We might come back to that. So I think that might be a better order in which to do things. Let's start on page 124. Knowledge perfects man. And true knowledge truth perfects knowledge. Certitude perfects truth. We're going to deal with them tonight. What we're reading now will apply to all philosophy and all sciences. But of course the scientists don't always know it. They ridicule some of this stuff. They go and use the same principles they've just ridiculed. Fortunately, not every scientist is like that. There's the Academy of Sciences that I'll be attending in Washington, D.C. in September. There are humble men there, I've discovered. Good, solid scientists who listen. So, first of all, truth. What is truth? Now, you remember we dealt with this as the transcendental properties of being. Every being is something. Every being is one. Every being is true. Every being is good. And because they're true and good, therefore, every being is beautiful. The transcendental properties of being. But tonight, you remember there are different ways something can be true. What we're talking about tonight is logical truth. And the definition of logical truth is adequation of intellect with thing. In other words, the truth of my knowledge is this, that my intellect conforms to thing in reality. So if I say there are 2 trees and 2 trees, my mind conforms to that and sees 4 trees. That's logical truth. Ontological truth is the nature of the thing, of course, as conformed with its source. That's another thing. So, this judgment, the book is on the table. What does that mean? That thing which is the book is that thing which is on the table. And what we're saying is those 2 concepts coincide. We saw that last week to a certain extent. Those 2 concepts coincide. Now, first of all, we enunciate this. We have 2 kinds of propositions. Maritain, in his work on logic, speaks about this very well. There's the enunciative proposition. I say to myself, the book is on the table. Then I look at it and I say, the book is on the table. That's the judicative proposition. The enunciative proposition is putting the subject and predicate together. And lots of authors think that's judgment. That's not judgment. The judgment takes place when I confirm that they're validly put together and to conform with what's in reality. That's the judicative proposition. I can make enunciative propositions one after the other. The number of stars in the sky is an even number. I could never verify that. That's an enunciative proposition. If I were to claim it's a judicative proposition, then put me in the greenhouse and lock me up. That's where I belong. So, the judicative proposition is like an assertion. It is true, some put it that way. It is true that the book is on the table. And that's what we're implying when we say in the judicative proposition. But the enunciative propositions, we can make them till the cows come home. But when we conform or confirm that it conforms to reality, that's when the judicative or judgment, the judicative proposition takes place. So, note that distinction. Now, a word or 2 about error there. We have a long treatise on that in Epistemology. And remember, what we're dealing now is the epistemology part of metaphysics, but of course, we're just doing a very, very condensed course in that. If we go into error, what can be the cause? Reality itself or my mind? They're the only 2 things at play. It must be one of them. And reality doesn't set out to deceive us. I could say, I've got some chrysanthemum here. They're false teeth. But they're true chrysarenum. They're not just or plastic or whatever else you like to use. They're truly that. It doesn't deceive me. We deceive ourselves by pretending they're real teeth. They're false teeth, but they're truly something. So if we go into error, reality or this can affect us. Now what about the intellect? The intellect cannot judge other than what's there. For instance, I look at the book on the table and say the book is on the table. My intellect tries to conform to reality. I might not take sufficient time to examine reality. For instance, I was up on Little Whitefish Lake in Canada one time at our biology school research station for the University of Ottawa. And I was working with the students, the biology students, who were collecting data on chipmunks. And all sorts of weird stuff was coming up. Had quite a cute way of doing it, as a matter of fact. They'd catch them, first of all, in little cages, little traps, and they'd clip the toenails. And they were able to give each one a name, an identity, or a number or something, based upon how they clipped the toenails. Then they'd have carbon paper, and the chipmunk would run over that. And they're very curious animals, of course, as we know. And they'd have a toothpaste carton, and the chipmunk would go through that, and he'd leave then at the other side, they had blotting paper, and they would could look at the marks on the blotting paper, and they knew which chipmunk had come through. He'd leave from the carbon on the carbon paper, he'd leave his marks there. So they were having a lot of fun with this. It was good until they started cutting them up and opening them up. But all of this research goes on conforming to reality. Now, a student might say, oh, I know what chipmunks do, they do this. A little prejudice, you see. I think chipmunks do this, and I know I'm going to prove it. And they prove something they think, but they haven't proved it correctly. So what's coming into this? Not the intellect, the will. The will distorts the intellect. Remember what we said about the intellect and the will? The intellect drives. Oh, sorry. Oh, that's very bad. The intellect informs the will drives the intellect. According to the principle of reciprocity of causes. Diverse things are not from themselves united. Oh, forgive me, I'm sorry. Causes, that's the wrong principle. Causes are causes to each other in diverse order of causation, but not in the same order of causation. I'll just added that bit. Causes are causes to each other in diverse order of causation. Remember the example we used? The wind blows the window open. What caused the window to open? The blowing of the wind. What caused the wind to come into the room? The opening of the window. Each causes the other in diverse orders of causation. So, the intellect causes in the order of specification, but the will drives the other in the order of efficient causality. So this is specification or formal causality. It informs the will what it should be doing, but the will sometimes will have a little prejudice there. So the will drive the intellect into a wrong conclusion. And you can imagine a student. What do they say? Student pulls an all-nighter. How many times I've heard that? I worked till late last night. Yes, you didn't work before. I worked till late last night, and then my computer collapsed, and I lost a lot. Ah, yes, you have to listen to this week after week. And damn well to say half the truth. But the student is anxious to finish. So they drive even into a false conclusion and look at the paper and say, oh, what a beautiful paper, because it's printed nicely and it's got footnotes. Even though you look up some of the footnotes they've put in, they don't apply at all. But students think we're born dumb, We're not born dumb, we just get that way after long practice. Anyway, but reminds me of a fellow once, a certain Monsignor yelled out, hey, Whitty, Whitty was furious because he'd been very rude to his wife the day before at confessions, outside, waiting outside the confessional. He came and sort of, "Why aren't your children at school?" They'd all been very ill. I knew the family well. And Whitty turned when Monsignor called out, "Hey, Whitty!" John turned around and said, "Tell me, Monsignor, were you born rude or did you just get that way after long practice?" Monsignor said, "That's no way to speak to a man with holy orders." John Whitty turned around and said, "You start acting like a man with holy orders and I'll treat you like one." So, the intellect in itself, if it's left to itself, won't go wrong. But the will drive it into error. Will cause it to take on some kind of error, impatience, prejudice, or something else. I've seen people declare that black is white. I had an argument with a young man once, we're about 22, 23. We'd been on a picnic, and he treated his girlfriend so rudely that some of us got him aside and pointed out bluntly. He was very rude, and we objected to it. And we got arguing. I got to the stage where he was a fellow that you just couldn't argue with. He just wouldn't allow you wouldn't grant you anything. And I picked up a blade of grass. "George, can we call that a blade of grass for a start?" "No, I will not," he said. So this is what the students do. It's the will that interferes. Like in my last 2 or 3 semesters at Niagara University, I had about half, I remember one class, there must have been 7, 8 or 9 people, homosexuals, in the classroom. And they were twisting the truth to justify homosexuality. The fact that we can prove that's an abnormality, a psychological abnormality, a physical abnormality, and a moral abnormality. Boy, those words are hard to come out tonight. So that is easy to prove. But they wanted it to be true. That's the real reason. So truth can be bandied around by people because of the will. The will is the only thing that can distort the truth. The intellect refuses to believe that the whole is not greater than its part. The whole is greater than its part. The intellect cannot refuse that. And when a person says they do, well, you can imagine their prejudice, trying to justify something. So there we are. They might come from prejudice, as I've got on the page there, a desire to defend a desirable or a favourite theory, a desire to meet a deadline and finish a paper for a professor, and perhaps taking a shortcut. Now we come to states of mind as a result of truth. Certitude. That's on page 124. Certitude. So what is certitude? We've got to account for these various 5 states of mind: certitude, opinion, doubt, nescience, ignorance. So, certitude. I like to put 2 contradictory statements to highlight the meaning of certitude. 2 contradictory statements. The ones that I found most applicable is, one says there is a God, and the other says there's no God. A. There is a God. Now the other statement, B. There is no God. If I'm certain, I adhere to one of these without fear of the other. I should use my pointer here. This is a special kind of pen. I write longhand that way and shorthand the other. So there is a God, which means what? He's certain. If he adheres to one, sticks to one without fear of the other. Now, that certitude may come from 2 different evidences. Or should I call them evidences? Certitude. It can be subjective, or it can be objective. The cause of that certitude. Subjective, that comes from will. It comes from a self-deceit. or something like that. Or a failure to investigate reality, to investigate the truth that they're either defending or something else. Objective comes from evidence. This comes from emotion or the will. This comes from evidence. The evidence of the principles of reason or the evidence of facts. So certitude, we've seen people, like a girl on one occasion, she'd been through 3 marriages and she's about to go in the 4th. I nearly had a fit when I was talking to her one day. She was telling me about them. And I said, you know, you're heading for disaster. Oh, I've made up my mind, and once I've made up my mind, I want... She'd made up her what? I questioned whether she did have what she claimed to have. But however, that's her business. But, naughty, naughty sister. But if I hold to one, now there's certitude. If I hold to one with a certain fear of the other, we call that opinion. If I hold to neither, then we'll call that doubt. Today, what do they say? What is your opinion about this? I've said I don't have an opinion on that. I'm utterly certain. One girl was heard to remark in a class of mine, funny how you must keep your mouth shut in a classroom with young people, because the one next to her comes straight after class and tell you, do you know what she said? That sort of thing. He's very opinionated, isn't he? When I was proving something. He's very opinionated. Couldn't even pronounce the word properly. She was a beautiful girl. She was some kind of model or something or other. Anyway, opinion is a certain uncertainty. But if you claim to be certain, then you better have the evidence to defend that. For instance, even this kind of evidence, empirical evidence. There's a giraffe out in the corridor. Well, the only evidence you can find of that is go and have a look. You don't take out a logarithm book or mathematics books of any kind, or a chemistry book or something or other, or even a biology book. You go and have a look. So doubt is that state of mind that fears this one or that one. And of course there's a psychological follow-up of that too. I always think of Patricia Wynett. Oh, I doubt if she's alive today. Patricia was a lovely young woman. She wouldn't harm a fly. There wouldn't be a sort of an evil act in the girl. But she was riddled with doubts about everything. She's walking down the street one night, she said to me, and she was a friend of my wife and myself. She said she walked on the flagstones, and of course the flagstones have crosses where they join, etc. Looks like a cross. And she wouldn't walk on them because she feared she'd walking on the cross that Christ was crucified on. You know, she was sick, poor girl. And, you know, she was that kind of person who went to confession every half hour or something. I heard of a priest in Rome, as a matter of fact, who was like that. During Mass, he had to have a confessor handy. That's a doubt, terrible state of mind, that kind of neurosis. Scrupulosity, yes, of the worst kind. A friend of mine, a priest friend of mine, said he'd rather deal with 10,000 sinners than one scrupulous person, somebody suffering from scrupulosity, because they're very difficult to deal with. But how do I know? How can I be sure? Are you the manager of the biggest pharmacy in Australia, which I think is much bigger than the so-called biggest one in Montreal, that they say is the biggest in the world? The Sydney one is much bigger. And this friend of mine there said, if only I knew, if only this is what I could get out of the manager. Jack Corrie was a lovely person, but could never be sure of anything. He's worried about moral scruples. If only I knew, but he'd never take the damn step to find out. And I could tell him, but he wouldn't listen. If only I knew. So, that's doubt. Now, nescience. Could you tell me what kind of a bush, tree, shrub was in my mother's garden before she died?
Of course not.
Of course not. Nobody expects you to know that. There's no responsibility to know such a thing. So that's nescience. You just don't know. But there are people who fill their mind with rubbish And they can recite all the presidents, and that's not rubbish, of course, but they can recite all the presidents of the United States or all the queens and kings of England off by heart, as if that's a great achievement. It's knowledge that the mind doesn't benefit from having. There's no benefit in that. There's no virtue in having that kind of thing in the mind, being able to rattle them off. Well, nescience should apply to that too. You just don't know, and you don't give a darn how many kings there were. It's interesting to read history, and I love history, but to be able to recite them all off is hardly to be praised. Now, ignorance, if I do not have knowledge of something, and I ought to have that knowledge, that's ignorance. The difference between ignorance and nescience. Nescience, ne in Latin, comes from a Latin origin. It means not, and scientia, science, knowledge, not knowledge. That's all nescience is. You just don't have that knowledge. If I were to ask you what my number plate is on the car, you'd say, I'm darned if I know, no, don't give it to him, and you'd be right. So that's the difference between nescience and ignorance. So the principles of reason give us certitude. The certitude of the premises guarantees the certitude of the conclusion. That's on the top of page 145. So it's evidence that helps the objective certitude. And the best evidence is either a principle of reason or something reducible to that, and a fact. Some facts are not truly facts. They have to be reasoned, and they're more conclusions than they are facts. Remember, there are two kinds of facts. There's a philosophical fact, and there's an empirical fact. Note the difference. A philosophical fact. Beauty exists. You don't have to be counting heads. Look at this young lady here. You know that beauty exists. That'll cost you $50. You know that beauty exists. Just looking at one person, it exists. I remember that little toadstool, little mushroom under a waterfall that my uncle and I saw in Australia. The Minnehaha Falls was? I forgot now which one it was. But this one, little mushroom, beautiful. We climbed down about 200 steps and suddenly stopped halfway down the waterfall to see this mushroom. Beauty exists. I've seen a squirrel. Beauty exists. You see a flower. I got roses bursting out in I don't know why, all the weeds wanted to hold them back in my gardens at the moment. But beauty exists. Only need one, that's all, for it to be a fact. But empirical facts, you've got to have a counting of heads. Around my home, there are grey squirrels, brown squirrels, blonde, black, around my home. Now, which is the greater number? You've got to start counting heads. And it can change. You've got to start counting the squirrels to find out. That's an empirical fact. When a person is experimenting with say, silver nitrate and sodium chloride to get silver chloride precipitated, white precipitate, you may do it once, but you say, did it really do it on account of that, or is there some other factor contained? So you'll do it several times to make sure that it's an empirical fact. When they found out that certain metals conduct electricity, iron conducts electricity, they tried this piece, they tried that piece, they tried that piece. And by the time they tried, say, a number of pieces, they said, well, I'm fairly sure that it is a fact that iron conducts electricity. So that's induction, by the way. From a lot of singulars, you rise to a universal. But is it truly a universal? No, but it's a convenient universal for what we're doing, and most likely will produce an opinion that every piece of iron conducts electricity, or something like that. And furthermore, when a man carries a cup of coffee to the head of the class, you can guarantee there's something in it for him. But I hope it's not in the coffee. So, but here's an example of a perfect, we've already seen this in application. Thank you. The philosophical act. The philosophical act. What does a philosopher do? He illuminates facts with principles of reason to find the cause of the fact. Here's an example. The same cannot be the reason of opposites. There's a principle of reason. But one and many are opposites. There's the fact. Therefore, the reason of one and the reason of many are opposites. There's the conclusion, which explains the cause of the fact. What are the principles that cause that? We call them potency and act. Excuse me. Oh boy, that's good. So, that gives us certitude. We'll see presently what kind of things can we be certain of. We can be certain of principles of reason, and we defend them by reducing them to the absurdity, you remember? All the principles of reason can be defended. So now let's look at modes of arguing uncertitude on page 125. Now this is, as I mentioned before, we'll be gathering some logic as we go along. So there are four ways of arguing. Demonstration, rhetoric, dialectic, sorry, what did I say?
You inverted the order. That's
I just thought there's something wrong. I tricked myself. Demonstration and dialectic, rhetoric, and poetic or literary argumentation. Demonstration is the scientific act. That's the properly scientific act, demonstration. That's the way we prove things. Demonstrare in Latin. What's the result of that? What strength does the middle term have? Remember, we have to have evidence. And we call the middle term the evidence. I'll just refresh your minds on that for a second. Here we have A, B, C. Does B belong to A? We don't know. We know that C belongs to A, and C belongs to B, therefore B must belong to A. That's the supreme principle in logic, remember. If two things are identified with a third, then they're identical with each other. So, we have only three concepts, three ideas if you like, three concepts, three terms in any logical reasoning. We saw that the other day. So demonstration does that. You'll see Mr. Bush requests drilling, say. Mr. Bush, the headlines, request drilling. Now there's your subject and there's your predicate of the conclusion. That's the A and the B. Perhaps we should use the logical terms. I suppose it would make a lot more sense. I'll change these. This is the subject, this is the predicate of the conclusion. And this is the middle term, the means or the evidence. When we do a little course in logic, you'll see this much clearer. Mr. Bush requests, or is interested in, let's say, drilling for oil. Now the body of the article, that's the headlines, the body of the article will contain the evidence. In other words, the middle term. He urged today Congress to follow this through, something like that. So the predicate belongs to the subject because the middle term belongs to the subject and the middle term belongs to the predicate. And that's the way demonstration operates. You might find you go through many of these. You might find you have to have another one and another one. There's a beautiful illustration of this in Woodbury to see his proofs in philosophical psychology, the proof of the immortality of the human soul, the proof of the existence of the human soul, the proof of the nature of the human soul, etc., etc. You go argument, 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 argument. This one. There's the three terms. 1, 2, 3. There's the three terms. 1, 2, 3. There's three terms of another reasoning. 1, 2, 3. I'm just drawing it up in principle at the moment. We should perhaps have some examples of this, and I might set something up in a sheet for you. So, there's the demonstration. Now, dialectic. It comes from two words. Dia in Greek, pronounced dia today. Dia plus lect. Lect means, in Latin, that root means to pick. The intellect comes from intus lec. Pick within things. That's what the intellect does. It wants to know the natures of things. It doesn't want to know where the apple is out there, but what is an apple? What kind of a being is an apple? The intellect alone gets at that, not the senses. So pick. This means through. We've got that word in English, diameter, diarrhea, through, etc. So pick through. Now, what does that mean? The dialectic is preparation for demonstration. Dialectic means going through. Is it this? Is it that? The classic example I like to use is one that Aristotle used. When he was trying to work out the principles of bodily things, he said they're either one or many. Now note, he's arguing with what we call yes and no. Per sic et non in Latin. That's to say, it's either one or it's not one. If it's many, it's either infinite or not infinite. In other words, finite. If it can't be infinite, you prove that's absurd. So finite, yes, it's either two. No, I'm sorry, it's either yes, two or more than two. So it shows all that's needed is two, matter and form. This is the dialectic, then it's submitted to this, and this is the demonstration. He demonstrates it after he's realized it could most likely be two. He demonstrates that only two are necessary. Beautifully put in Aristotle. But this is the dialectical process. You might in a classroom be saying, oh, there's some good students and there's some bad students. Are girls more inclined to be good students? Well, they work harder. There's no doubt about that. As Father Croteau said to me, the dean at Ottawa when I was there, yes, girls do work harder than the boys. And it's more likely to be the boys who will pull the all-nighter and do their essays the night before it's due. And when you read them, you can see they did that too. But what's I going to say again? But if you go through a process like that, is it boys or girls? Well, these girls seem to be like that. These girls weren't like that. That's a dialectic. Thinking things through. Discussion groups, a kind of dialectic. We had a debate on one occasion when I was directing a youth organisation in Australia. We had a debate on whether we should cement the bottom of Sydney Harbour to put the crabs on a firm footing. That's a beautiful. Isn't that a beautiful laugh? It's a funny thing. Every time I opened my mouth, the audience laughed at me, and I couldn't see what I said that was funny. But it was a very interesting debate, and of course there was some really witty stuff went over. Intended wit, not like mine. Mine's because I put my foot in it usually. Anyway, but the whole debates, they're really a kind of dialectic. People argue this, that way, or something else. So that's a preparation for demonstration. The demonstration will end up at certitude, you'll be certain. And the conclusion, like the middle term will be certain. And the conclusion will be certain. And I'm sorry that this, for some reason, is cut off like it has. To which power does the evidence belong? You see it's cut off at the page there. It's the intellect. It pertains to the intellect. I'll try and do something about that. Now the dialectic, less certain, the middle term is, less certain, and the conclusion's only probable. Again, the intellect comes into play. Now rhetoric. Here The middle term is less certain and much weaker, in fact. And the conclusion is much weaker. And it pertains to the will. Rhetoric is an appeal to the will. Rhetoric is an inducement by the will to believe this. And we get this as one good friend who does a lot of public speaking said once to me in recent years, he said, all the time you get asked by newspaper reporters, or you hear on the in the press or in the television and radio, how do you feel about this? Well, I don't feel with my mind, I feel with my fingers. I don't know about you, but the but the feeling, how do you feel about something? It's an appeal to the will or the passions, not an appeal to the intellect. So that's the rhetoric. It's sometimes called political argumentation because politicians use it quite a lot. Now, unfortunately, it didn't come on the page correctly. So there's literary or poetic argumentation. That's the weakest of the lot. That is a use of words and appeals to the imagination, not to the intellect, not to the will, but the imagination. So, for instance, there's a beautiful example in one book. I meant to bring that with me tonight in Vincent Edward Smith, The Elements of Logic. He said a famous poem by Shelley, I think, I can't remember now, or Byron was it? A famous poem that just didn't catch on right. And he changed one word. Now, one word was so beautifully placed that it hit the spot. And people became very interested in that poem because of that. One word. That's an appeal to the imagination. The press uses it all the time. You know, they use rhetoric and they use poetic argumentation. For instance, they didn't say he fell to the ground, he crashed to the ground. Doesn't it sounds worse, doesn't it? He sort of crashed to this. Or I hear on the television frequently, something I never heard outside this continent is how they like to pun all the time while giving the news out, you see. And you hear the little pun in the words there somewhere coming into the news. They're appealing to the imagination. So they're the four ways you can argue about anything, often called material logic. So the arguments are appealing to the intellect, the will, or the imagination. And you've got to remember, when you're arguing, which you're going to do. Now, on page 126, can we know any truths? Truths, I should say. First of all, we're opposed by the skeptic. The skeptic is a man who denies we can know any truth. Nothing's true. You can't be sure of anything. Two young men in my life I remember very well stand out in my mind. One in Australia, young Jewish lad, and one in Montreal, a French-Canadian lad. And this young lad, like a lot of people in Canada, have beautiful English names and don't speak a word of English. You can find that a lot. But this lad had a French name and didn't speak a word of French. So James was his first name, Jacques. But the skeptic claims that we cannot be sure of anything. Modern skepticism, founded as it is in anti-intellectualism, proposes that all opinions are equal, that there is no one true opinion. And to admit anything contrary to this is to be opinionated. And Webster's dictionary defines opinionated as adhering to one's views unduly. Well, I don't know about you, but I stick to my opinion very unduly, if you like. I think that if you stepped off the roof here, you'd go flying down with gravity and crash. But I'm not supposed to think that way. It's extraordinary, these people who write those silly things. Beware of dictionaries with definitions, my friends. They're so often wrong, so wide that they're meaningless. So, one must wonder at the lack of criticism about the mathematicians who have formed some kind of conspiracy claiming that 2 + 2 = 4, and chemists who claim that there are atoms and who claim that the chemical reactions take place. Nobody ever questions that. But as soon as a philosopher says something is so and so, you'll get an objection from somebody. The Somebody did say, how many philosophers are in the United States? Approximately 300 million.
How many are well trained?
Yes. So the dogmatism of these people, it's extraordinary. Those who claim certitude in philosophy are regarded as dogmatists. They speak as if they have the truth. Why it is added, no one has the truth, there is no truth. And that is the truth, my friends. I was asked at Niagara University by the current dean at the time of the College of Arts and Sciences that I was attached to, and Dr. Bonnet too. I was asked, when I went in to see the dean and the vice president for academic affairs, I went in to see them. We each had to be interviewed. That's another joke that goes on in academic life. The first thing Sue asked me was, Raphael, do you think you have the truth? Do you think you have the truth? Well, what is the truth? A stupid question. Do you think you have the truth? I wonder if she thought that when they kicked her out from being dean. I wonder if she thought they had the truth. So, here's the point. We're going to put it in logical form. Things don't always appear in logical form. So when it's put in logical form, they're not so sure of themselves. Certitude, or truth, is such that it does not exist. There's the subject, there's the predicate. What evidence have you got for that? Subject and predicate. Who has evidence for that? If you don't have evidence, then is it true or not? You don't know. If you do have evidence, well, there's the first truth then. The first certitude, if you have evidence. You've contradicted yourself whichever way you go. It's absurd. Certitude is such that it does not exist. It may be certain, it may be not certain. If it is certain, it is either self-evident, and I don't think that's self-evident. That's built upon a prejudice. What does self-evident mean? It means that the predicate is involved in understanding the subject. It means when you understand the subject adequately and you understand the predicate adequately, they're both identical. Both identical. That's what it means. Is that subject automatically involved in the concept of certitude? Well, if it is, I can't see it. And I don't think he can either. So if it is certain, it's either self-evident or not self-evident. If it's not self-evident, its evidence is from another. If its evidence is from another, can you be certain of that evidence? And so on. He's wrong when he says that certitude does not exist. If it is not certain, then the proposition might be false, so that certitude might exist. That is, the skeptic might be wrong again. Remember what this young man, James, said to me. I don't think you can be certain of anything. I said, oh, nothing? No. You're certain of that. I'm not certain of that. But you're certain that you're not certain of that. I'm not certain of anything. Then I said, wait a minute. I'm all confused. Let's start again. You're saying you can be certain, I'm saying you're not certain. No, you're saying you can be certain, I'm saying you can't be certain. So you're certain of the difference. He walked right into it, and he was big enough to know it. He walked right into my trap. He was certain of the difference between being certain and not being certain. But there was his first certitude, and he openly expressed it without realizing it. He had left the faculty of philosophy, and the secretary of the faculty, somehow, I can't remember, I think I was asking his secretary, that's right, Mademoiselle Gingras. Remember Lise Gingras? Remember her name? It's funny how you can remember some names, you can't remember others. And Lise said to Martinelli, the Father Martinelli was secretary of the faculty, said to him that Monsieur Waters was asking after this young man, James, whatever his name was again. And so Martinelli sent for me. He said, I heard you were asking after that young man. He said, I thought you might like to know. He's reapplied to come back into the Faculty of Philosophy. I was shocked because he'd given it away. Nobody can be certain of anything. They're teaching us a lot of rubbish. Here he is back applying again. That's one of the cases in which I have some certitude, I think, that I made an impression on a student, I think. Anyway, that was interesting though. He couldn't be certain of anything. But he was certain of his uncertainty, and certainty that his judgment was different from mine. Whichever way he went. Dr. Russell, remember Tony? Dr. Russell got outside with him after, he brought James into lunch. Dr. Russell and my wife and I, we all lived in this large apartment. And we got outside and said, my God, nobody's ever stood up to me like that before, he said. And Tony Russell was very, very amused by the whole situation. So the skeptic says you can know nothing. One must wonder at the lack of criticism about the mathematicians who have formed some kind of conspiracies. And so I go under those conditions. So it's a little repetitive there, I apologise for that. So note this great truth. There is no truth. And this great dogma. There is no dogma. So it should be asked if these dogmatists who object to truth produce the evidence for their assertion that there is no truth, that we cannot be sure of anything, that there is no certitude. What is the middle term whereby this predicate is united to this subject? Remember what I said, the middle term could be a whole article in the paper. The headlines would be the conclusion, but the middle term would be the article. Sometimes it takes a little sorting out. What's the essence of this? And Vincent Edward Smith in his Logic book brings that out beautifully. So if it is certain, it's either self-evident or not self-evident. If it is not certain, then the proposition might be false, so that certitude might exist. And so we go on. But you always look for the middle term. When you get some training in logic, you see the middle term, you see the evidence for the person. What evidence do you have for that? That's what the middle term means, the evidence. So, in making a claim that it is certain but you have no evidence, then you're merely asserting a subjective certitude. I've written that down for you. That is, you're a pure dogmatist. Oh boy, that's the greatest insult you can offer a skeptic, to tell him he's a pure dogmatist. Boy, they rise under that. So this is what the pure skeptic. There are, if my memory serves me correctly, you can say 5 or you can say 8, depending which way you look at it, of reasons for skepticism. People who object and say we can be certain of nothing. There are 5 major ones of reasons for that. For instance, like Descartes and people of that type would say there's a great ghost or great something out there that's deceiving us when we think we're certain of something. Yet he made the silliest assumptions of certitudes. I think, therefore I exist. As the philosophers long ago have pointed out, he should have said, I exist, therefore I think. Not I think, therefore I exist. His existence comes before he thinks. But even that would be wrong, not very accurate. Now the person who denies any certitude, any knowledge, any value to human knowledge, he contradicts himself in 3 ways. First, he knows the aptitude of his mind for his knowledge. And I trapped James with that when I said, you're certain of this. And when I said, you're certain, I'm certain. No, it's the other way around, he said. Poor lad walked right into that. But we're certain of our existence. That's the first thing, first certitude. Secondly, or I've got them in a different order here, the truth of the principle of non-contradiction. You are certain is different from you are not certain. I am certain, not certain, is different from I am certain. So he knows the distinction between is and is not. Truth is such that it does not exist. Truth is such that it does exist. He knows the difference there. He knows that difference. So he's assumed that. What have I done here? Excuse me. What have I done? Lost my page. What page are we up to?
127.
Thought. Thank you. So, I've really dealt with all of those. He knows that his intellect has an aptitude for the knowledge he has. But he knows the truth of the principle of non-contradiction. He's sure of his own existence. Now, if he knows the principle of non-contradiction, at least implicitly knows the truth of it, therefore he must also admit the other principles, because they're all applications of the principle of non-contradiction. Let me tell you in the distinction between what I call the universal and the particular distinction. In fact, for the ethics students, I drew up a page or two on this. Being is the most fundamental of all concepts, ideas, if you like. We have nothing more fundamental than being. That which is the definition, you remember. So all other concepts are really applications of this. And the principle of non-contradiction is about being. And all other principles are applications of that. All other principles are really applications of the principle of non-contradiction. In other words, nothing can be and not be at the same time under the same respect. That's the principle of non-contradiction. Or if you like, between be and be not, there's no middle. That's the same principle, put in a different way. And likewise, in ethics, there's a supreme principle. We ought to do good, obtain good, seek good and obtain and do good, rather, seek good and do good, and avoid evil. That's the supreme principle in ethics. And all other principles, there can be no coordination without subordination. All other principles, that's one of them, are applications of the first principle to human activity. I've never seen a book point that out. I wish to goodness they did. They should have. That there's the particularizations, as I call them, in all of these matters in science. Make a good paper, that, wouldn't it? So, all other principles of reason are reducible to the principle of non-contradiction. So if you admit the truth of the principle of non-contradiction, you implicitly admit the truth of the others, even though you don't intend to do that. I think we'll stop there for a break and a nice cup of coffee.